Have you ever pondered why certain gazes pierce you so deeply? As if they knew too much, like they existed long before you did. Perhaps no one has ever explicitly told you, but the hue of your eyes carries ancient wisdom about your purpose in this life, to experience love. This truth isn't in modern manuals or quick-fix self-esteem guides. It's encoded in archetypal symbols, the subtle nuances of your face, and those fleeting reflections when you gaze into the mirror, not just to check your appearance, but when you genuinely look at yourself, when you allow yourself to see and just be seen. Carl Jung said that symbols are the language of the soul. What could be more symbolic than your gaze? It touches others without physical contact. It reveals even when you try to conceal. Right now, you might think your eye color is merely a genetic inheritance, a random assortment of pigments and chromosomes. But that's what they tell us when they detach the body from the soul, when they decide that all we are can be reduced to science, statistics, and biological functions. But you sense there's more. There always has been. The truth is, you weren't born with brown, green, or blue eyes by accident. Your soul chose that shade to convey something you came here to heal, something to experience, something to remember. And perhaps it is through love that this message shines most brightly. Because in love, the deepest parts of our psyche come to the surface. As we try to draw closer to someone, our light and shadow dance most intensely. And our eyes, they're the meeting point of these two forces. Have you ever noticed how some eyes draw us in inexplicably? It's not just beauty, not just chemistry. It's as though something within them calls to us saying, "I know that pain," or "I know what you're seeking." And maybe that's why so many people fall in love with a gaze before they know the story. Because eyes speak a language the mouth has forgotten. They speak of essence. In today's world, where everything is filtered, everyone rushes, and everyone strives to present an image, a genuine gaze can still stop time. But why are we so disconnected from this truth? Because we grew up hearing, "Don't judge a book by its cover." But nobody taught us to understand the soul behind the cover. No one taught us to listen to what eyes say in silence. We ignore one of the most potent keys to self-knowledge, perceiving our body as a symbolic reflection of the soul. The ancients knew this. In initiation civilizations, eyes were considered spiritual portals. Egypt, India, Greece, Tibet, all spoke of the energy of the gaze as something sacred. It wasn't superstition, it was wisdom. And this wisdom stated that your eye color reveals the kind of love you came to experience and the kind of love you came to heal. Jung would call this an archetypal calling, because everything you feel, seek, or repeat in relationships isn't accidental. It's an unconscious repetition of stories that need integrating. The gleam in your eyes? It's a quiet reminder. Let's try an experiment. Close your eyes for a moment and try to remember someone who deeply touched you. It doesn't have to be requited love. It could be impossible love, unfulfilled love, a gaze that stayed with you. Now try to remember the color of that person's eyes. Do you notice how that memory still lives within you? It's because that person's eyes touched something in you that was dormant. What's intriguing is that perhaps their eye color, so different from your own, attracted you precisely because it carried something you lacked or concealed. Jung would call this projection and shadow, when we seek in another the parts of ourselves we've forgotten to love. Here's one of this video's most profound revelations. The eye color you're most drawn to may be the direct opposite of your own, because it represents the energy your soul longs to integrate. If you have light eyes, you may crave the strength and depth of a dark, solid gaze that grounds you. If you have dark eyes, you might yearn for the lightness and subtle vision of someone with light eyes who makes you dream. But it's not about aesthetics. It's about the energy behind the color. That's what the subconscious perceives, even when the conscious mind doesn't understand. This dance of gazes between light and shadow is what makes love so mysterious. It's what makes you love someone who makes no rational sense. What makes you experience tremendous pain losing someone who perhaps hasn't been in your life long. Because it's not about time, it's about resonance. Eyes, with their color and vibration, are the instruments of that resonance. But what about your own eyes? What do they say about you? Have you ever looked in the mirror with the intention to see yourself, not just to assess? It's an uncomfortable question, because most people look in the mirror searching for flaws, not revelations. But eyes don't lie. They're like windows to a story your mouth may never dare to tell. When you start understanding the language of your eye color, be it blue, green, brown, hazel, or any unique shade, you also start understanding your role in relationships. What pattern did you come to change? What kind of love are you ready to experience? And what are you still learning to deserve? Have you ever felt like you always attract the same type of relationship? Maybe the problem was never the other person. Perhaps you don't need to change the person, but your gaze. Change how you see yourself. Change what you deem worthy, because it's all imprinted in your psyche and reflected in the iris of your eyes. When Jung first wrote about archetypes, he wasn't speaking of signs or personality labels. He was speaking of layers of the soul expressed through form, gestures, color, body. When he said the body is symbolic, he urged us to abandon a mechanical view of existence and begin noticing the wonder hidden in every detail of our own biology. Now I ask you, can you imagine what it would unlock in your love life if you started interpreting the light in your eyes as a map to your essence? Perhaps the answer you've sought so long isn't in another person's behavior or unanswered messages. Perhaps it's in the mirror, staring right back at you. From this moment on, everything you thought you knew about yourself could start to shift. You're not just a person with brown, green, or blue eyes. You're a soul that chose to see and be seen through this particular lens, because that lens carries a mission, a lesson, a destiny. In the next stage of this journey, we'll unravel together what each color means, not in a superficial sense, but in a symbolic, spiritual, energetic way, because your eyes have been trying to tell you something for a long time. And maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to listen. Imagine standing before the mirror. The house is quiet. Time seems suspended, as if the world has hit pause so you can experience this moment. You slowly approach your reflection, not to fix your hair, not to conceal fatigue with makeup, or to pretend everything is all right. You approach because, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you want to truly look at yourself. As you do, something unexpected happens. You sense a presence, a strange feeling of familiarity, as if your eyes hold an entire history, an ancient narrative, a story you may have never even told yourself. Eyes are that. They store, they whisper, they remember what the mind forgets. If you were born with brown, green, blue, or some other unique eye color, it's not accidental. It's not just about aesthetics. It's about purity, a vibration that resonates with what you're destined to experience, especially in love. In love, we are naked. We can create an image, a pose, a defense for years, but it takes just one right gaze from the wrong person, or vice versa, for it all to crumble. Who you become in those moments speaks volumes more than any narrative you've repeated about yourself your whole life. In 2025, we're more open than ever. Yet paradoxically, we're also more closed off. Relationships have become quick, fluid, sometimes disposable. But the emptiness many feel after a fleeting, superficial encounter isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of depth. Those who feel that emptiness, who feel too much for the modern world, often carry an ancient soul, a soul that yearns for connections that can't be explained, but can be recognized. Perhaps that's you. You feel you love differently, that you notice what others don't, that you see beauty in small details, in shared silences, a gentle touch, a gaze that wavers before opening up. It's for this you've been called too sensitive, too intense, too deep. Deep down, you know it's precisely that, too much, that makes your presence unforgettable for those who know how to see. Strangely enough, it's often why you fall for people who aren't ready, people who are charmed by your soul but frightened by its depth, people who look into your eyes and know, without understanding why, they can no longer pretend to be superficial around you, that they'll have to bear their emotions, that they'll have to look at themselves. Maybe they're not ready for that. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt you gave too much to someone who couldn't receive it? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and seen an entire future, while that person was merely looking for a distraction from their unresolved past? These pains have deep roots. Jung wouldn't explain this as emotional weakness, but as the result of an imbalance of archetypes. He'd say that entering a relationship activates unconscious forces, reflecting unhealed wounds, old patterns, or even archetypal memories you carry without realizing it. Now, look at yourself again. Think about your journey to this moment, about past loves, the silences left behind. Ask yourself, what did your eyes seek in each of those encounters? What were you trying to find? Perhaps the answer lies in the language the ancients called symbolic, because in all great spiritual traditions, eyes weren't seen only as physical instruments. They were spiritual signs. Each color carries a vibrational field, a mission, a specific form of love, and a way of being loved. Brown eyes, for example, are associated with the archetype of the guardian. These are people who offer security, support, and presence. Often they forget themselves to support others. When they fall in love, they do it with their whole being, but they find it hard to express their own needs. Blue eyes, in contrast, are considered seers of the invisible. These are sensitive souls connected to the intuitive plane. They usually love in silence, but silence can turn into a chasm when the other person can't interpret unspoken gestures. Often, they're idealists, dreamers. They love deeply, but can get lost in fantasies the other can't keep up with. Green eyes carry the energy of transformation. People with that gaze live in constant internal transformation. They're intense, passionate, ambiguous. They love with fire and fog, can give themselves entirely, then leave without warning. They're a bridge between what is and what could be, and therefore often misunderstood. There are also hazel and amber eyes, those unique mixtures. They usually belong to people who live between worlds, who feel everything at once but can't explain it in words. They're emotional chameleons who adapt to their surroundings but dream of a place where they no longer need to hide. When you start seeing all this, not as superstition but as a symbolic language of the subconscious, something shifts. You begin to understand your own patterns. You start realizing that what seems like a curse, always attracting the same type of person, makes sense. It's a pedagogical repetition, something your soul insists on reliving time and again until you finally integrate it. Your eye color mirrors this. Look, perhaps you're someone who has spent decades seeking to be understood, someone who adapted, dimmed the light in their eyes not to disturb others. But now, something within you awakens. Something calls you to return, to remember who you were before masks, before wounds that made you promise yourself you'd never open your heart again. Maybe that's why you're here, not by chance, not out of boredom, but because your soul recognized this call, a call to reclaim the power of your gaze, to look into others' eyes and no longer ask for love, but offer your presence, to look at yourself in the mirror and, instead of approval, offer acceptance. Stop being a spectator of your feelings and become the protagonist of your own emotional story. At this stage of the journey, you probably already sense this path is more internal than external. It's not just about understanding others, but understanding yourself. And for that, you need tools, practice, silence, a method. That's why I want to present something created specifically for this moment in your life. A guide that doesn't give ready-made answers, but asks questions that lead you deeper. A process that doesn't promise miracles, but invites you on a genuine journey of reunification with yourself. I'm talking about the ebook, Jung's Method, 5 minutes a day for inner peace and clarity of mind. It's like a symbolic mirror, a virtual portal helping you translate all you feel into small but profound steps. It helps you integrate what Jung called wholeness of being, not denying pain, not running from shadow, but embracing it all with clarity. The link is in the pinned comment to this video. Click it when you're ready to see yourself truly, because sometimes all we need is a map to return home. The path begins with your own eyes. There exists a silent language that transcends time, words, and even bodies, a language that few have learned to decipher, but that everyone feels on some level. This language is eye color. Have you ever noticed how in some people, their gaze seems to speak even before they open their mouth? How some eyes tell stories no one dared to write down? Today, we'll delve even deeper into this living mirror. We'll touch the hidden layers of symbolism revered by the ancients and which modernity tries to stifle with diagnoses and classifications. Because, contrary to what you've been led to believe, your eye color isn't just a matter of genetic inheritance. It's an energetic signature. If you learn to listen to it, it can reveal patterns repeating through decades, traumas you inherited without realizing it, and even the types of love your soul desperately seeks. Have you ever noticed some people's eyes radiate inexplicable calm? Even when they say nothing, they seem to say everything. Others have a fire, a restlessness hidden behind their gaze, as if they're at war with something invisible. This isn't just character, it's vibration. This vibration is expressed even before any action, in hue, intensity, and how a person looks at you or averts their gaze. Now pause for a second. Recall your childhood, the person who most influenced you emotionally. Maybe it was your mother, father, or a grandparent who looked at you with a mixture of pain and tenderness. Try to remember the color of their eyes. Did you manage it? Now try to recall what you felt when that person looked at you. What did that gaze evoke in you? This memory isn't trivial. It shapes us, because the first gaze we receive in life, especially one that recognizes or rejects us, becomes an unconscious template for future relationships. Jung would call this a visual affective complex, and many of us spend our lives trying to recreate, correct, or avoid the first gaze that imprinted us. That's why you sometimes fall for someone without understanding why. It's not love, it's an attempt at healing. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever met someone and in the first seconds felt you knew that gaze, even if you'd never seen that person before? This recognition led to an intense, often unbalanced, but impossible to ignore connection. This is where we must talk about the archetypes behind colors. Let's explore together. Blue eyes carry the archetype of the seer. People with this gaze are naturally connected to the invisible world. They feel before they understand. They love with their whole soul, but sometimes get lost in their emotions. Their eyes reflect a sensitivity that can be both a gift and a curse. They see more than they should and suffer because of it, but they also see beauty where no one else notices. When you look into blue eyes, you might feel a coldness that comes not from the soul, but from the depth of a contained emotional sea. The challenge for such people? Learning to express their feelings, because the world doesn't read eyes as well as they read everything around them. Do you know someone like this? Or maybe it's you. Green eyes, on the other hand, are rare. Like everything rare, they carry a certain mystery. These people live by internal movement. They're intense, transformative, almost alchemical. One moment, they're full of warmth, the next, distant and silent. It's not instability, it's complexity. These are people who feel everything deeply but don't open up easily, because they know the power they carry, and that not everyone is ready for the intensity revealed by their eyes. If you've ever loved someone with green eyes, you know what I'm talking about. You never seem to know them completely, and that enigma, that dance of light and shadow, attracts and challenges the most. Now think for a moment. Which of these energies is closest to you, and which attracts you most? Write in the comments what color your eyes are and what you think they say about you. This interaction can open a powerful field for collective reflection. Maybe someone with eyes completely different from yours will read what you wrote and recognize themselves in your experience, because we're all mirrors. Sometimes we need another's gaze finally to see ourselves. Brown eyes, the most common, are often underestimated. From an energetic perspective, they're the most grounded. They're the eyes of the earth, of ancestors, of quiet care. These people support, care, and accept, but they also carry a deep pain, the pain of being forgotten, because in a world that deifies the unusual, the ordinary is discarded. People with brown eyes often bear the emotional burden of the whole family. They're the invisible center of many homes, but behind that silence often hides tremendous loneliness, a desire to be cared for, to be seen, to be recognized not only for strength, but vulnerability. How many times have you been strong for everyone and no one noticed you needed support? If you feel your brown eyes were trained not to cry, not to tremble, not to waver, perhaps it's time to allow yourself to look at yourself with more compassion, because the strength you always gave the world is now needed by you. Finally, amber, chestnut, and golden eyes are eyes of transition. People who live between worlds. They don't always feel they belong. They possess traits of different colors, different characters. They're observant, but also intuitive, rational, but very sensitive. They're alchemists, transforming everything they touch, often without realizing it. Their eyes shine differently depending on the light, the moment, the emotions. It's not only aesthetic, it's symbolic. These people came to unite, to show that love can be both solid and light, that one can be roots and wings, presence, and freedom. If you have eyes of such a changing hue, you've probably been misunderstood, called indecisive, fickle, ambiguous. The reality is that you simply feel more than one world at once, and your mission might not be to fit in, but to show there isn't just one way to love. Do you realize how all this goes beyond the physical? How the symbolism of eyes touches layers of the soul you might never have accessed before? The most impressive thing is realizing how these characteristics directly influence your choices in love. It's not you who chooses the person. It's your psyche, your shadow, your emotional history that quietly recognizes in another a chance to repeat or heal. If you're tired of repeating the same cycles, loving too hard, giving yourself to those who don't know what to do with it, being misunderstood, perhaps it's time to change your gaze. Not the physical gaze, but the internal one, how you read yourself. As long as you keep looking at yourself with eyes of pain, you'll keep choosing with eyes of trauma. Now, comment here. What you learned most about yourself in this part. What archetype best describes you? When you interact, you don't just express yourself. You awaken something in the one who reads you. Maybe that awakening will be the start of a new way to love, more conscious, more whole, more you. Because in the end, eyes don't lie, but we must learn to listen to them. It starts right now. Imagine the following scene. You're sitting in a cafe. The day is grey, but there's something cozy in that melancholy. Opposite you sits a person, maybe an old friend, maybe someone you just met, but with whom the conversation feels timeless. Suddenly, between a sip of coffee and a pause in the conversation, you notice that person's eyes, but not like usual. You notice how they change in the light, how they reveal emotions before they're spoken, how you involuntarily feel read. Now, be honest. How many times have you felt pierced by a gaze? That kind of experience happens more often than we think. It's not empty mysticism. It's science, psychology, energy. Recent research in neurobiology shows that eye contact activates brain areas associated with empathy, intuition, and emotional processing. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology showed that direct gaze, especially between two emotionally connected people, synchronizes their brainwaves by 75%. Biologically, we align with the one who looks at us deeply. Here's the most interesting part. This effect intensifies when the other person's eye color differs from our own. The brain perceives the difference in hues as a signal of novelty, increasing attention and the emotional charge of the interaction. Different hypnotizes us. But what if it isn't just the brain? What if it's the soul? Carl Jung said that what attracts us so strongly in others is actually hidden within ourselves. The shadow, the suppressed part, what we deny, forget, or fear. Gaze, with all its symbolism, its unconscious weight, becomes the means of this projection. That's why a person's gaze can heal or destroy. Let's take a step back. Return to your adolescence. Try to recall when you first fell in love, truly. It might have been at school, in the street, on a bus. Do you remember that person's eyes, how they looked at you, or ignored you? That moment shaped your emotional patterns more than any advice from your parents, because what we feel in our first love relationships is rarely forgotten. Moreover, we often spend our lives trying to revive or correct that first experience. Now think how many times you've loved someone who reminded you of another person, not outwardly, but in the intensity of their gaze, how they made you feel. Notice how such relationships are harder to break, even when they're irrational. It's as if part of you says, "There's something I still have to understand here." Almost always there is. Jung would explain this by saying your psyche sees a mirror in the other, but not just any mirror, a distorted mirror. It shows not only who you are, but who you could be, or who you never had the courage to become. This interplay between who you are and who you project is largely activated by the gaze, especially when the other person's eye color carries an emotional frequency opposite to your own. Look, brown eyes tend to attract blue ones, because they represent a stability that sensitivity lacks. Green eyes beckon to the dark, because they're a middle ground between mystery and intensity. Amber, chameleonic eyes usually inspire admiration in anyone seeking integration. It's not about genetic compatibility. It's about symbolic attraction. That's why some people simply break us. Have you ever met a person who broke you with one glance, who made you feel naked despite all your emotional defenses? Probably. Maybe that person left. Maybe they stayed. Maybe they loved you, but didn't know how to deal with the depth they uncovered. There's something sacred but also dangerous in these connections, because if the other person isn't ready to cope with what you awaken in them, or you with what they awaken in you, the gaze becomes a battlefield. That's when toxic relationships are born, from which you can't leave, however painful, because the connection formed isn't logical, it's symbolic, it's archetypal, as if two souls activated an ancient memory, a memory demanding healing, not separation. The scariest fact emerges here. Studies at Stanford University showed that over 60% of people remain in relationships they consider emotionally harmful due to what they call symbolic emotional attachment. It's not usual emotional dependence, it's an unconscious attachment to what the other person represents. You know what's the main signal that triggers this attachment? The gaze. As if the other person's eyes say, "I know your wound, and I'll touch it." The cruelest part is that often the other person doesn't even realize what they're doing. Have you ever experienced anything similar? Then leave your story in the comments. It can be a phrase, a symbol, a name you don't have to say completely. Share, because your story might resonate with the story of others. Together, maybe we can build a space of collective healing, even a silent one. Now, let's return to eyes. Imagine an ancient oracle, a temple where a priest, looking into your eyes, revealed your life's mission. It's not just a poetic image. In initiation civilizations, it was reality. In Egypt, priestesses of Horus interpreted the soul through the iris. In Greece, Pythagoreans studied the light of gaze to determine temperament. In Tibet, monks were trained to detect psychic imbalances through the shine and color of the eyes. What about today? Today, we call it a cinematographic device. But maybe cinema is life, and eyes are windows into what you forgot. Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you look at disappears." That's why some eyes scare us, not because they threaten, but because they force us to see what we evade. Maybe you recognize yourself as someone who avoids deep gazes, who looks away when they feel they're being read. It's normal. Most people do, not because they don't want to connect, but because they fear what they'll be forced to feel. The paradox: only those who allow themselves to feel can heal. The first step starts with eyes, with your eyes. Before looking into another's eyes and asking for love, you must look into your own eyes and ask, "Am I ready to love myself?" It seems simple, but try it now. Stand up, go to the mirror, stand in silence for 30 seconds and just look. Don't judge. Don't look away. Don't fix yourself. Just see what you see. If this question unsettles you, it's a sign that there's a truth waiting to be recognized. Eyes are the part of the body that ages least. They change in intensity, yes, but not in essence. The child you were still lives in them. The dreams you abandoned still live there. Perhaps that's what another person recognizes when they love you. Not who you became, but what you forgot. Eyes are portals, because they connect the visible with the forgotten. If you've reached this point in the video, maybe something in you is ready to remember. Not rationally, but symbolically. Not with words, but with sensations. If you can, write in the comments the oldest memory you have linked to a gaze. Maybe it contains the answer to something you haven't been able to resolve, because in the end, we're imprinted most not by words, but by silence. There's no silence deeper than the one existing between two gazes recognizing each other, even not knowing why. One question that many ask themselves for years but can't answer. Why do I love the one who hurts me? Why do I desire what destroys me? This question isn't born in the mind. It comes from a wounded heart, from a soul tired of repeating cycles, that, even tormented, still tries to understand why I keep returning to the same emotional place, even knowing it causes me pain. Perhaps until now you've considered this weakness. What if I tell you it's symbolic language? Jung believed that what attracts us emotionally is the key to what we need to integrate within ourselves. We fall in love with what represents a part of ourselves we've forgotten, denied, or rejected. The stronger the attraction, the greater the potential for transformation or destruction. That's why the love we feel often makes no sense, because it's irrational, archetypal. You didn't fall in love with that person because they were perfect. You fell in love because in some mysterious way they possessed the energy your psyche needed to become whole. It doesn't mean they were your ideal partner. It means they were your mirror. Mirrors don't exist to comfort. They exist to show. How many times did you catch yourself seeking a gaze that didn't notice you? How many times have you wanted to be noticed by the one who only looks at themselves? How many times have you changed your expression, your words, your body, to be accepted by someone who never wanted to know you truly? It's time to admit it. Maybe you've never been loved as you deserve, because deep down, you never allowed yourself to show your true face. Here's the most important moment of this whole journey. Your eye color not only shows what you came to learn in love, it also shows what you came to offer. Let's talk about that. If you have brown eyes, and you constantly give yourself care, support everyone, maybe your lesson is to set boundaries, to recognize that love without reciprocity is self-abandonment. The one who carries the strength of the earth also needs someone to water them, look at them, listen to them, because even a stone, if ignored too long, starts cracking from within. If you have blue eyes, and you're used to silencing feelings, pretending to be indifferent not to scare others with your emotional intensity, perhaps your mission is to open up, to communicate, to teach others to read your depth, not with complicated words, but with genuine presence. The one who carries an ocean in their eyes must also learn to swim in it, not only to be a sea for others. If you have green eyes, and you've spent your life wavering between extremes, living between passion and loneliness, between enchantment and the fear of being enslaved, maybe your soul asks for integration, not to choose a side, but to be your own equilibrium. You don't need to stop being intense. You just need to learn not to lose yourself in the intensity. If you have amber, hazel, and indefinite hue eyes, and you've always felt you don't belong, don't fit in, move from one world to another, maybe it's because your mission is precisely that, to be a bridge, to create new forms of love based not on possession, absence, or pain, but on freedom, fluidity, and deep listening. When you understand what your gaze taught you, you stop waiting for the other to save you. You start loving consciously. What's even more important, you start choosing consciously because, here's a harsh truth, the fact that someone awakens something deep in you doesn't mean they deserve to stay. The awakening is yours. The wound is yours. The responsibility for healing is also yours. How many times did you confuse intensity with destiny? How many times did you believe that pain was a sign of connection? How many times did you think you couldn't live without that person? Today you realize that what held you back wasn't love, but an attachment to a recognition they never gave you. It's hard to admit, but necessary, because, as Jung said, what we don't accept as truth controls us as fate. It's time to change that fate, and it doesn't happen with new relationships. It happens with a new gaze, a gaze that you, from now on, will cast upon yourself. You're not what happened to you. You're what you decide to do with what happened. If your gaze is a portal, as many spiritual traditions and psychological schools claim, the first step might be to pass through that portal from within. Relearn to see yourself. Relearn to love yourself. Relearn to choose. How do you do it practically? That's what we'll talk about now. A step-by-step guide to apply all this knowledge practically, genuinely, and transformatively in your daily life. A deep, emotional, and applicable plan so that your love story with others, but primarily with yourself, is never unconscious again, because you deserve more than repeating patterns. You deserve to see, choose, and live fully. You've reached this point, and that in itself is a sign that something in you is ready for change, not only for understanding, but for a new life, because there's a difference between understanding with the mind and integrating with the soul. The world needs people who don't only know Jung, archetypes, and the unconscious, but who are capable of transforming this knowledge into real actions, choices, and relationships. What you've heard until now isn't theory. It's a call, an invitation to look at yourself in the eyes and start living from within, with courage, awareness, and true love. How do you do it? How do you apply what we've talked about to gaze, archetypes, colors, projections, and love patterns in daily life? Not with grand promises, but with small rituals, with conscious micro-decisions, with silence that, for the first time, will mean not loneliness, but encounter. Here's a strategic plan to help you implement this transformation in your life. A path of 7 steps, 1 a day, or 1 a week. You choose the pace. You choose the commitment. First, the mirror ritual. Dedicate 5 minutes a day to look at yourself in the eyes in the mirror without rushing, without judging. Just be there with yourself. Breathe deeply. Observe your feelings. If tears come, let them flow. If discomfort arises, accept it. If silence comes, listen. Ask yourself, what are my eyes trying to tell me that my mind hasn't heard yet? Second, draw the map of the archetypal gaze. Determine your eye color and mentally reread the archetypes we discussed. Write down 3 qualities you recognize in yourself and 3 patterns you repeat in relationships. Then reflect. What does this have to do with how I was looked at in childhood? What am I trying to heal through others? Turn these answers into a personal map. Leave it in a visible place. Remember, cognition is the first step to transformation. Third, a list of unforgotten gazes. Write the names or just symbols of 3 people whose eyes left a mark on your life. Love, pain, rejection, inspiration. The reason doesn't matter. Next to each name, describe what you felt when that person looked at you. This will show you what kind of energy you seek or fear most. Being aware of this already changes everything. Fourth, fast from the empty gaze. Throughout the day, practice full attention during encounters. When you talk to someone, look in their eyes. Notice if there's life there. Notice if there's presence or only distraction. Most importantly, notice what you offer with your gaze. Love, fear, lack, control. A fast isn't refusing food, it's refusing superficiality. It's a day without automatism, without autopilot answers, only present eyes, even if only yours. Fifth, writing to the wounded gaze. Write a letter to your inner child, the one who was ignored, judged, forced to silence, or whose shine was dimmed by overly harsh gazes. Write as if it's a meeting after a long separation. Say what he or she wanted to hear. Promise that from now on, you'll be the adult who will look at him or her with love. Then read the letter, looking at yourself in the mirror, quietly, in an even voice. It's one of the most powerful rituals you can undergo. Sixth, the inversion exercise. Think of the person you judge, someone who triggers strong reactions in you. Now imagine looking that person in the eyes, without words. Ask, what am I projecting onto him? What in him awakens something in me that hasn't yet healed? When you start seeing the other person as a mirror, judgment dissolves into compassion. It doesn't mean you have to allow everything. It means you have to stop carrying another's burden. Seventh, the commitment to conscious gaze. Finally, write down your commitment. A simple phrase. Let it be the guideline for your next encounters, your next relationships, your next choices. For example, from this day forward, I choose to be as I am, and I choose to see in others more than they show. Read that phrase every day until it ceases to be a phrase and becomes your stance. These steps aren't tasks, they're portals. They require presence. They don't require perfection. They require truth. If at some point you feel you need more structured support to continue this journey, I want to recommend a guide created precisely for this, a practical and deep tool to dive into Jung's teachings and apply them in 5 minutes a day, even in the rush, weariness, routine.